Hello and welcome to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host and city manager, Doug Bartosh. And today we're here with Al Ponce, who's our Ordinance Enforcement Officer. And we're here to talk about, ordinance enforcement, code enforcement, which it's commonly known. And just to kind of introduce the topic, every 2 years the city of Cottonwood does a citizen satisfaction survey. And code enforcement issues tend to be one of the major complaints we get back, having to do with junk cars, weeds, unsightly signs, junky yards, just a variety of things. But there's really a strong sense in the community that people want to live in a clean community because obviously it adds to their level of feelings of security and quality of life. And so that's why code enforcement is so important. So let's talk a little bit about it. And I know just recently we've kind of had a campaign to educate people about junk cars.
Right.
So let's talk about junk cars. Al, what is allowed, what isn't allowed?
Well, it's kind of funny because there are cars in yards that have been there for years, but we do allow people to have 2 vehicles in the backyard as long as it can't be seen from the street. So if you've got it screened or somehow not visible from someone driving by, you're okay. But if you have more than 2, then you have a violation, because we don't want to have a junkyard started, or we don't want to have some kind of issues going, rodents love cars and we start having those kind of problems. So keep it to a minimum. And sometimes people have a car that, I've been finding out that it's a vehicle they want to work on one day. That's their project vehicle. So, you kind of look at those things, see why that vehicle is there. And you get all kinds of answers about those kinds of things. We didn't know it was there. I've actually had that one. And that's how long it was there. And then we have sometimes, I don't know what to do with it. We bought the property, or dad died or something, and that car's been there and we don't know what to do with it. So we have to go through all these different things and help people walk them through this, remedy to get rid of this car or truck or whatever it may be. But if they've got a vehicle and they plan on doing something with it later on, they can have 2 of them.
And so what happens if it's like parked out in front, like on the driveway or even in the street? What are the requirements?
That becomes a violation of the city's zoning ordinance 404, and you will receive a violation warning in most cases, or I'll go talk to you if you're around, but sometimes people aren't around. And you have about 10 to 14 days to get that vehicle out of that driveway or front yard, whichever it is. And like I said, you can put it in the backyard, and as long as we can't see it, or if it's something you got to get rid of, we can help you find a way to get rid of it and move it out of there, because we don't want to blight the neighborhood with a bunch of junk cars laying around.
And I noticed that that you can have a car parked in the driveway or on the street, but it's got to be operational.
Right, and by that it means it's got to be registered, it's got to be insured, it's got to have good license plates on it. So, and I do know a couple of guys that have some cars that have been sitting in the driveway for a while, but they keep registering the vehicle, and they keep the tires aired. You got to have it's got to be up like it's ready to be driven somewhere. So, in that case, we'll be okay with it.
And again, some of this may be a little bit of a change in that we probably haven't been as proactive as we should have been all along to get people to take care of their junk cars. And like you say, they're not always junk to them.
Right.
I mean, they're a future project or a current project, and so we don't want to discourage that. But it is important to keep them covered up. The other one I obviously get all the time is weeds. And talk a little bit about weeds and what the ordinance says.
Okay. In fact, we've been spending a lot of time this year because we haven't had much rain, and we know the fire danger is going to be pretty high. I work with the fire inspector, Rick Contreras, and Steve Trotman, the fire marshal, and we are going around pretty soon. We're going to be starting a campaign to make people aware that they need to keep the weeds down. You don't have to scrape the ground clear, but you need to have the weeds mowed. You need to keep defensive space around your property, so it's, if you have a wood pile or something for your fireplace, you need to keep the weeds away from that. A lot of backyards kind of get left and get wild. We need people to clean those up. And we'll use the same process. We'll go and talk to people, and if we find someone that isn't responding, then they get a violation warning from the city, and if they don't respond to that, then they get a notice of violation, which gives them actually more time, but they then have to appear in court to explain to a judge why they didn't cut their weeds. One of the other problems we have, and it's been kind of a thorn for a long time, is easements and alleys. And the easiest way I can tell you how it's handled, if it's an alleyway where you can drive through, a vehicle can go down that alley, from what I understand, the city will go and take care of the weeds in that. But if it's an easement, you have telephone poles or water lines or like a phone company line or something like that going through, you're the one that has to take care of it behind your house. Let's say you've got a yard, you've got an easement behind it, and it's full of weeds. You and or the guy on the other side need to get out and keep those weeds down. And so we'll be looking at that this year, because those are really, really close to houses and other buildings and vehicles, and we don't want that stuff catching fire.
You know, and that's interesting that you brought that up, because I do get questions a lot of from people that go, hey, the city has an easement through my property or next to my property, and they need to come out and take care of the weeds. And I have to tell them that no, the city only has an easement to go in there and work on the drainage area or, you know, a utility. We don't maintain the easement.
Right, it's just an access for the utility companies of the city to do work.
Yeah, an easement doesn't mean we own the property. An easement means we have the ability or the right to go in there and work on it. But so if you have an easement, you're responsible for maintaining that. And, you know, I know with weeds, too, we kind of go after it, which is very important from the fire safety standpoint. There are many cities out there, and I think Cottonwood's probably going to take a look at this as well, that also look at it from an aesthetic standpoint. Is, you know, because obviously if it's the middle of the winter and you have 3-foot weeds in your front yard that are wet, it's not necessarily a fire hazard, but it sure doesn't look very good. And so I think we're going to be looking at that as well and taking that to the council for consideration.
Right. I've been dealing with a lot of those over the last several months, and we have had a lot of compliance. I think of about 45 to 50 cases within, say, the last 4 or 5 months. Almost all of them came into compliance, and pretty quickly. People were out there and they go, you know, I didn't realize that my weeds were that bad. You know, and you know, it was winter. A lot of people weren't really paying attention outside, and it was cold, so nothing was growing, but there were a lot of dead weeds. So we tend to get a lot of compliance with that, and it always seems that when we see in the news a big fire somewhere in California or something like that, all of a sudden the phone starts ringing, hey, someone's got a bunch of weeds, and so
people get
concerned about it.
And legitimately so. The weeds can really pose a fire hazard, and particularly if you're anywhere close to you know, an open space, and so it is important to maintain those. I know the other one we hear a lot about is kind of outside storage. Explain what that is and you know, what the ordinance allows or doesn't allow.
Well, basically, if you've got stuff, and that's the only way I can explain it. It can be tools, it can be automobile parts, it can be camping equipment, it can be all kinds of things, fencing. You know, if it's out in your front yard and everybody can see it, it needs to be stored somewhere or in something. A storage shed, a garage, on your carport even, you know, we don't want it stacked high to the ceiling or anything like that, but we want it in an orderly fashion. There are places where people just put things out and they've sat there, or they don't realize that they put it out for a convenience. Maybe they're going to pick it up later or something. But sometimes people will complain about it, or we'll drive by and go, wow, what a mess.
Yeah. So
we have to get those straightened out. And outdoor storage basically means a large gamut of stuff. I mean, like I was saying, it's different things. But the storage portion of it is you have to have it put away.
And I think a lot of people maybe don't appreciate that these are important from a couple of standpoints. As I talked a little bit about quality of life, and coming from the law enforcement field, that's a very important issue. And we talk about in law enforcement the broken windows theory. If a community or a neighborhood or a block begins to look trashy and junky, and there's broken windows and outside storage and junk cars, that invites crime, and it makes people feel unsafe. And so that's why it's important to keep our neighborhoods clean. The other reason is because there's other people that live around you that may keep their house up, and consequently their value of their home or property goes down when the rest of the neighborhood looks trashy. And so it's important from those two standpoints that we keep our yards, keep our properties up. The other thing is that we want a beautiful community. We want a community that we can all be proud of, and so that's why it's important to keep these properties up and keep them looking good. The other thing that I think we struggle with is we have a lot of rental properties in our community, and that can be kind of difficult to deal with at times as well.
Yeah, the rental properties, not all of them are bad. A lot of them are good, but we have a lot of rentals that are owned by people that live out of state or across the state, and they're totally unaware most of the time of what's going on. They're receiving their rent, which is fine, but they don't know what the property looks like. They only have it in their mind what it was when they left. And so we have to educate them and tell them, here's what's going on. We'll send them pictures of what's the complaint or what we see, and hopefully we'll get a resolution to those kind of problems. Most of our homeowners in town seem to do a really good job, and they're the kind of the catalyst for reporting things. And so we have renters too that do it, but it's a push and pull kind of thing sometimes.
Let's go ahead and take our first break, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about code enforcement.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness.
When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Hello and welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and today I'm here with Al Ponce, who is the city's code enforcement officer, and we're talking about the various codes and requirements that we all should know about. The other thing we seem to run into a lot is camping in the city, and I know you just handled one of these for me, and you did a great job, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
So, what's the rules on camping?
Well, you can camp on your property, and it has to be a lived-in property. It can't be a vacant lot. You have 14 days that you can camp there. So if your brother comes down from Minnesota or something during the winter and he wants to stay at your house, he can camp in the driveway or somewhere on the property for up to 14 days. But you can only do that 3 times a year. So, not your brother, you. You can only allow it 3 times a year for 14 days. Otherwise, there's no camping in the city except in places like RV parks or like our friends at Dead Horse State Park who have campgrounds, some of the Forest Service land that they let people camp on. Those are legal. Yeah. You can go and camp there under their regulations and stipulations. But in the city proper, you can't camp on the street. You can't camp in parking lots, whether they're private or public. You have to have permission from landowners if you do come into town and want to camp on their property. And you know, we do get that. We can't allow people living in motorhomes, camper trailers, truck campers, vans. You're just not allowed to have a residence of that type. And it can't be a guest house either. You know, you can't, by a guest house, I mean you can't have a long-term living situation and those kinds of things. Not only is it because you have sewer problems and things like that that can occur, but there is actually a safety issue. And we've been very, very fortunate over the years that we haven't had some of the problems that have occurred in other communities where camper trailers catch on fire, people get trapped inside, and the worst can happen. There's also situations where people plug things in, you know, electric lines and other utilities that they run to the camper trailer. Technically those are illegal unless you've got like your extension cord and you're doing it to keep the refrigerator going during your camping period. But to live in it, you can't, because those wires and a lot of those systems that are built into those RVs are not made for long-term continuous use. They're only a temporary thing. That's why they're campers. You know, they're not mini houses.
You know, and I can appreciate this because my dad used to travel around quite a bit camping with his RV, and he'd come to my house and park behind my house, and I actually had a pad made for him out there, and you know, he'd stay a week or two and then go on. But to have somebody essentially set up home there would have been inappropriate, and again, the impact on my neighbors would have been very difficult. You know, and I think we're all okay with, hey, you know, maybe a little bit of time, but yeah, don't stay there forever.
Right, and if the Cub Scouts, you have kids in the Cub Scouts or Girl Scouts and they want to camp in the backyard during the summer,
right?
That's fine, you know.
Yeah, that's usually a one-night thing.
Yeah, and it's not a big thing. And we go to these, we get reports of this stuff, and we go, or I go, and talk to the property owners, and you know, a lot of our stuff is education. You know, they weren't aware of the situation. Right. Once in a while, you get the guy that doesn't want to help out, but you know, not very often.
You know, and I remember a big component of this had to do with kind of transient camping, and we had transients that were camping in, you know, some of the washes and those kind of things, and they would create campfires, and it created a lot of concern for residents in the area that, you know, is that campfire going to get out of control? Is it going to threaten my house? And also the tremendous amount of mess that was left behind from these camps. So it was kind of a multifaceted approach to, you know, not only dealing with the transient camps, but dealing with people who were essentially almost renting out a portion of their property for somebody else to live in an RV. And
right.
It just didn't work.
Right, and it never works. You know, the long-term staying in the camper trailer or camper and RV, just, you end up having trash, like you say. Some of our open land area, Forest Service has to deal with that all the time. and they have a rule about having 14 days in one place, and then you got to be so many miles after that away from there after they tell you to move on. Yeah, it can create issues, and so we try to keep on top of that. We know there are people that are out there, they're continuously moving. They take their tents or whatever and they kind of hide for a while. So fortunately, the police department I'll let them know, and they'll go out and they'll get these people to move on. And we try to take care of it as best we can, but you know, sometimes the public needs to give us a call and let us know what they're seeing.
Yeah, and certainly we get those. And you know, we've got a proactive code enforcement program, meaning if we see it, we take care of it. But probably a good 80%, I would think, of the code enforcement violations we get come from the public reporting them, I would think.
Well, you're kind of right. We get a lot, but I'm finding too that if I go out and I'm being proactive, we get a lot more.
Yeah, I'm sure.
You know, I'm sitting in the office just isn't going to cut it.
Yeah, no, and again, a lot of times it's rental properties, and the property owner isn't even aware of what's going on their property or the violation, and so
right.
It seems like a lot of them, once you advise people that, hey, you know, you can't do this, or this needs to be cleaned up, it seems like most of the time you get pretty good compliance.
Usually. Sometimes we have to chase people down. You know, I had a property owner that was in Hawaii, and for some reason it was really hard to get hold of the guy, but once we did, he cleaned that up within a week.
Yeah.
But, you know, sometimes it takes time, and that's something people have to understand. When they report these things, it's not like a traffic ticket or a burglary or something like that where the police are going to take action and follow through and catch the bad guy tomorrow morning and everything's taken care of. We have to notify the property owner. We have to notify whoever is involved. And sometimes if it's a big issue, it's going to take some time to get it done. And, you know, people have to understand it's going to take them that 30-day period or 10-day period, whichever they're dealing with, to get this problem taken care of. So it's not an overnight thing. But sometimes, you know, it's just, you have to keep pursuing it, and you have to make sure people are, you know, on top of it and keep them aware of what's going on.
Let's go ahead and take our next break, and then I want to come back and talk about our rental code.
Okay.
A lot of people aren't aware of that, so come back and join us.
There are people who struggle with addiction and homelessness. Sometimes it may feel like there is nothing we can do to help.
But there is. You can make a tax-deductible donation and help those in need transition away from homelessness.
When you give someone a handout, you could actually be supporting an addiction.
A better life starts with better health, especially for those living in the streets.
Support solutions, not addictions. You can make a difference. Visit cottonwoodcares.com.
This is Bruce Morrow, Transportation Manager for Cottonwood Area Transit. Remember, we cover the entire Verde Valley and Sedona. Cottonwood Area Transit has you covered wherever you want to ride in the Verde Valley, all day, every day. Take Cottonwood Area Transit through Clarkdale, Verde Village, and from 26 locations in Cottonwood. With Verde Links, it's a quick and easy trip to Sedona every day. Don't forget our connectors to Camp Verde. Visit cottonwoodaz.gov for Cottonwood Area Transit and take a seat. Let's go ride.
Welcome back to Inside Cottonwood. I'm your host, Doug Bartosh, and we're here with Al Ponce, who's our Ordinance Enforcement Officer, and we're talking codes and what's required in terms of property ownership in the city. One of the things that probably a lot of people don't know about is we have a rental code, and it's important because we do have a lot of rental properties in the city, and you know, we were talking off camera about how there are some rental properties in the city that probably shouldn't be rental properties, or they should be condemned because they are in such unsafe condition, that nobody should be living in there. And
Right.
and you find many of those, Al?
Actually, we've come across quite a few, a lot more than I ever thought were there. It's kind of amazing that some people will be living in things that we shouldn't be living in. You know, houses that are maybe not structurally sound, places that have no electricity. I've found people living in little garages or sheds, and it's like, what's going on here? Yeah. You know, those are unacceptable, completely unacceptable.
And you know, you got to have plumbing working. The windows can't be broken out, and
Right.
and those kind of things. And I know, as you talked about, we just recently had a case like that with a house on 12th Street that was kind of being used as it sounded like kind of a drug den.
Yeah, and it was a house that I had talked to the owner who lives back east, and he was under the impression all this time that someone was going to rehab the house, and I'm not sure where that went, but it never occurred. And it was your kind of like your broken windows theory. All of a sudden, there's somebody living in there, and I had passed that house many times and never saw anybody. We never got a call from the neighbors or anything. So certain people find these places and hide out in them, and you never know. But on the other aspect of it is that there are people getting rent for things they shouldn't be. They're renting sheds and, you know, old camper trailers and things that people shouldn't be living in, and they're very dangerous and they're very unhealthy. The rental code that we have that the city passed several years ago explicitly talks about those things, that, you know, you can't live in those kinds of situations. And it also has things that the renter or the landlord needs to be aware of, in that they have to maintain their property. They have to keep it up to shape all the time, up to code. One of the things that I've run across quite a few times is that in the rental code, the landlord is supposed to supply a residential unit with a trash can, you know, a dumpster. And we've had several that didn't. And we've got that somewhat taken care of. But, you know, if you're a renter and you don't have a trash dumpster and you're having to pile your trash in the front yard or in the back, your landlord needs to know that under the city law, he's required to provide a dumpster, and that would clean up some of that stuff that's out there.
You know, and I think it's important to say that, you know, we're not interested in going after the renters. We want to make sure the renters have safe space. But a lot of times they recognize, or they are concerned, that if we come in and inspect an unsafe property, we're going to condemn that property and ensure that nobody's living there until it's repaired. And so then the renter goes, what do I do from here? And I mean, we would certainly work with them to try and get them into alternative housing, but we don't want anybody living in unsafe conditions. That's where people end up getting injured or losing their lives by living in unsafe conditions like that. So please, if you live in a place that doesn't have plumbing that's working, unsafe electrical, you know, broken windows, those kind of things, let us know about it. And particularly if you live in the neighborhood and you see something that's unsafe or is, you know, just creating a public nuisance, give us a call and let us come out and take a look at it. On the commercial side, I mean, kind of all these same things apply to some extent.
Right.
But I know with commercial and retail property, one of the things we really struggle with is signage.
Right.
Because everybody wants to advertise, you know, their great product and get people to notice them, and we appreciate that too. But again, it's that quality of life issue. If you go down the street and you can't even walk down the sidewalk from all the A-frame signs and, you know, those kind of things, it really causes problems.
Yeah, and the sign issues, it's really kind of funny. Because the state is trying to pull the rug out from under the cities and towns about sign ordinances. So
freedom of speech issues.
And there's all kinds of things like that. But there's also the public safety issue. You can't block the sidewalk, you know, whether it's a homemade yard sale sign or a commercially made sign. You can't put it on the sidewalk and get in people's way. You can't put it in the street. You can't put it in the driveway. It has to be out of the way. It has to be well maintained, and sometimes that's an issue all unto itself. We have the big flag banners that we're kind of going back and forth on about how the city's going to deal with those. And we have the big plastic banners that, like a lot of the convenience stores put up, advertising beer or soda or something like that. And they have to have permits for that from the Community Development Department. A lot of the signage requires permits, and they need to contact Community Development to be aware that whether or not they need a permit for that type of sign. So that's something we're kind of touching here and there, and we're kind of waiting for the state legislature to decide what they're doing with this. Yeah. They've got this real estate sign ordinance or state law that could affect all kinds of signs. Yeah. So and it's still in process, so I don't know where that's going to end up. So it's kind of maddening to have to try to deal with these things and realize that either I'm going to have the rug pulled out or we're going to be even more having to go after people.
Well, our sign ordinance is really due for an upgrade too, and like you say, we probably need to wait and see what the legislature is going to do, and then open it up to the public again and get people's feedback and go from there.
It's really kind of funny because if you see some of the signs on almost all the businesses in town, you see a conformity. You see a size, a color. You have to look for it, but once you see it, it's like, oh yeah, all these businesses on Main Street or on 89A, they all have very similar signs as far as the size of them. So they're following the rules and regulations.
Yeah. You know, and being a baby boomer, you probably don't remember this song, but there was a song, sign, everywhere a sign. And I think most people, that isn't what they want. They don't want to drive down through their community and all they see is this, you know, just get bombarded by signs. And so you got to have some control.
Right.
And so that's what's interesting. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
Wow.
But I think I'm going to have Al back because, like I said, this is an important topic for our community, and our citizens have told us that this is important. And so work with us, not only in terms of getting your property cleaned up, but if there's a property in your neighborhood that's messy, that needs to be cleaned up, and it's not getting anywhere, give us a call. We'll come out and see what we can do to get it cleaned up. It's our community. We want it looking nice. We want our property values to be sustained, and we want to live in safe communities. So work with us. It's a community-wide effort, and we really appreciate your help. Come back and join us again on Inside Cottonwood.